Welcome on the Leaders Who Care. Another episode of a very special guest today, someone that has been making such a profound impact on the humanity with working with a number of leaders. He's also the author of the best-selling book, Personal Socrates, Better Questions and Better Life, and the host of the top 50 ranked podcast, Behind the Human. I have the privilege to welcome Marc Champagne. Marc, thank you for joining us and welcome on the Leaders Who Care.
The privilege is mine. Thank you so much for having me. Just in our short conversation before we hit record, I mean, there's so much alignment in the work that we're putting out in this world. So I'm excited to dive deeper.
I really honor the work you do. You spent over a decade studying the mental fitness practices of some of the world's most successful and brilliant thinkers. You specialize always in training teams to integrate and tailor mental fitness practices designed to help them clear out mental clutter, but also to thrive, which is something we're deeply passionate about. And I'm sure you have a lot to share. But initially, you were really more of in a corporate space when you started
Yes.
your career and being in sales from early days. And how did you transition that? What inspired you to make such a shift?
It's a good question. I mean, because I never had an objective or vision to become an entrepreneur or anything in anything related to this field that I'm working in, linked to mental fitness. So it kind of just happened naturally, because when I started in the corporate space, starting in sales, uh, that's where that's where some of the I wasn't calling it mental fitness at that point, but that's, if I really reflect back, where the practices started. And the foundational practice for me that started was, well, if I'm in a sales function, and anyone that is linked to sales, has targets and objectives and all that kind of stuff. If I'm in a sales function and I have to hit these numbers, and I'm being trained up essentially in the same way as the entire sales force, right? We all have the same access to training. We all have the same access to the resources in terms of the products we're selling and so forth. How possibly can I stand out of that group? And at that time, and I still think today, frankly, the question or the answer was, well, I'll get up 10 minutes earlier and I'll just consume positive content. So I started reading different books and biographies, and at that time, blog posts and so forth, and quickly realized that no matter who I was studying or who was featured in those posts, they were all asking really powerful, reflective questions, personally and professionally. So I'd write those down. And then I would take some time either in that moment or the next morning, my next session, and I would just journal on those questions in relation to where I was at, and did that for about 8 years, very consistently. And at one point, and I was doing it digitally as well, near the end, because I was traveling a lot for that job, and just grew really frustrated with the digital solutions that were available for that practice of journaling. And it was around the same time that the meditation apps were starting to take off, like Calm and Headspace. So there was this insight that, well, people are open to being guided digitally in this space, but there was nothing that existed for bringing people into a reflective practice like journaling, and from the perspective of the best of the best in leadership and in creativity and relationship, all of that, right? Journaling was seen as, oh, you're talking about the young boy or the young girl writing about like the crush at school or something in their diary, which there's nothing wrong with that, but no, I'm talking about, you know 100% of the people I was studying were doing this in some capacity. So that, with that, and thanks for it's a bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but there was something internally that said, well, I have to try that. I have to try to create something, because I know how impactful the practice has been to me, and I know how many others are using it. But there's a huge portion of the population that have no idea how to get started in something like this, and it's so simple and so accessible. And I left that corporate role at one point to create, at the time, what it was called Keo, which was one of the first guided journaling apps. That I'm proud to say we reached, nearly 90 million people with that product in the first couple of years. So I'll stop there. I've said a lot, but that was that was the catalyst for jumping out of the corporate world.
Wow, there's a lot of really thoughts that are coming into my mind, especially with that for 8 years to really reflect and ask some of the most powerful questions. That is really unique. I haven't really come across someone doing this, which is kind of brings me to your book. Tell us more about your book, and I'm very curious about the questions already.
Yeah.
But from the years of studying the greatest minds and interviewing people at the top of their game, has any advice methods really surprised you?
Well, what so the book the how the book came about was that it's essentially an extension to what that journaling app was designed to provide, and just that's to provide people with questions to help them pause and think and come off of the autopilot that most of us are on in the regular world. So the book is just another medium or vehicle to do that. And I really tried to curate people that anyone would recognize their names, like Picasso or Marcus Aurelius or Maya Angelou or Coco Chanel, because, and hence the reason probably why we're doing this podcast, it's not like these practices are new. They've been around since the beginning of time. What makes them useful or applicable is the story around them, and helping people see, oh, I didn't know that about Coco Chanel, and how I can apply kind of her thinking to my life just through, a few simple questions, right? So that's how it came about. And I'd say the thing that surprises me most about, there's 35, I think, profiles in that book, but there's been almost 400 interviews now at this point, studying, all of these exceptional thinkers. The thing that surprises me most is that they all, because this is it's such a simple thing, but most of us don't do this, but they just all prioritize time to still their mind, to just be in some sort of place of quiet on a daily basis. And that doesn't mean hours of quiet. That could be 5-10 minutes of a walk outside without any other distractions, to let the mind sit, and what I call let the mind, breathe and blow out some of that mental clutter and debt. Because those individuals that are operating at, in the top, 5 or 1%, let's say, they're making decisions, or they have insights that most people can't see. But doesn't mean that most people don't have those same ideas and insights. It's just they're masked, they're cluttered with all of this other stuff, emotions, relationships, the noise of the world. And it's in those moments of stillness and taking time to think that that stuff surfaces. So that's, it's always, and it happens over and over again, no matter who comes across either the podcast or who I might be writing about. And it's always kind of smirk now at this point, because it seems so obvious, but it's not, at the same time, because it doesn't feel, in our modern day world, it doesn't feel productive to do that, right?
I'm just wondering, with my own experience, that has been so helpful when you have that quiet time and really to be with yourself. And I've noticed that people who really succeed and really thrive, they do have practice or either meditation, or they really kind of ponder and sit on their own. It's almost impossible if you don't have that to survive into such a busy
Yeah.
and like really hectic life or career. you can for certain years, but then we see a lot of burnouts, a lot of issues that are coming in,
Yeah.
and I feel that
That's the thing, though. Important to say. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but eventually you will be forced to pause and think. And I think that's where it gets interesting, where we can either do that on somewhat on our own terms or be forced into that moment, which typically is a lot more painful than, going on into an experience like what you guys do, and in a beautiful space in the mountains, and take time to ask good questions and let the surroundings and those people pull things out of you that wouldn't happen sitting at a desk or, running from meeting to meeting. So important.
what are some of the most powerful questions? Maybe if you can think of the top three questions that you can think of that really you could advise anyone to ask
Yeah.
themselves or to ask a colleague or their family or anyone that are using them.
It's a good question, but hard question to answer, because I really see good quality questions as a what's the right word? To have a good quality question, it's not necessarily the question itself, it's the timing and relevance of the question to you personally that makes it incredibly impactful. So, you know, and I will answer your question. I'll give you a few of those that are just staples that you can't go wrong. But before doing that, I'd encourage people to just take some time to think about, maybe it's a challenge, or maybe it's a business or situation that you're dealing with right now that you're trying to work through, and pay attention to the questions that surface in what you're reading or podcasts like that you're listening to, that are most appropriate in helping you in that moment, because then that becomes really useful. And, maybe 3 to 6 months, that same question doesn't hold the same weight, for example, because you've worked through that situation. And in my book, in particular, that's kind of the guidance, is don't read it cover to cover. Just open up the table of contents and pick a question or person that stands out for you, because that's probably what you need in that moment. And you can do that with any book or any podcast. Open up the feed and just go through the title and stop at the one that really calls your attention. And that's when you get the most value out of these things. So the long caveat, but I think it's important to share that, because it becomes very applicable. But standard questions that you really can't go wrong with, that are so simple but so profound, in the sense that if you do these consistent, or if you ask these consistently, it's nearly impossible not to generate data for your internal empire, let's say. And that's just to start the day with the question, in one word, how does my mind feel today? And ask that, not from a place of judgment, just data. I feel anxious. Okay, well, where do I feel that? My chest is a bit tight. Now, just even stopping there, often acknowledging or drawing your mind to the place where you feel that, often releases a lot of that tension. But let's say it doesn't. Then the next question is, well, what's fueling that anxiety, or that depression, or that, worry or fear? And then you can start taking a look at, it's just like when we run a business, we're always gathering data to make decisions, but we don't do that for ourselves and our minds, right? So now we have data. Well, let's if so and so, or this situation is causing stress or fear or whatever it is, well, I can make some changes, or cut the fuel source, right? And just starting the day, like, and that doesn't take very long to identify that. I'm talking in a matter of minutes, definitely under 10 minutes. But just doing that, you start the day feeling like you've started on your own terms and in control of something, because now you have information that you make edits towards. And the biggest thing is that, whether you ask that question or not, you're still rolling into the day with those emotions, and they affect everything. So I'd rather ask the question and understand and see if I can make some changes, because it affects how I communicate with other people. It affects how I think, or how I surface ideas or don't surface ideas, whether I'm really short and, aggressive, either with colleagues or my family. It affects everything, right? So that's the staple that I ask I ask myself every single morning, and just do it as your coffee brews, or your first cup of tea, or glass of water. It doesn't have to be this big thing. It's just stack it into something you're already doing. One other question though that I have to leave is, and I would suggest doing this when you can, again, kind of quiet your mind, maybe take a walk or something, or have a few slow, deep breaths. And it's just the question, what am I pretending not to know? And when you think about that, like, though, usually the answers are those things that they're kind of in the back corner of the room, like, oh yeah, it keeps coming up daily or weekly, but I don't want to deal with that thing because it's for whatever reason. Maybe it's painful, maybe it's challenging, whatever it is. But usually that's the thing that is the unlock to so many other opportunities, and definitely allows us to feel a lot better. But we rarely ask a question like that, because we operate, because of society, for the most part, we operate on the surface most of the time. But a question like, what am I pretending not to know, brings us into the core of things.
This is I'm just listening so carefully and reflecting on what you just said, and it's like almost we can just go on with a number of questions because that's
Yeah.
so valuable. But what personally works for you, Mark? And really, how do you take care of yourself?
Hmm. Well, I kind of reverse engineer it, and I take a look at, if I break it down to the year, let's say, what are my objectives personally and professionally, and goals and so forth. And again, just like we would map out a brand strategy for a company, you've got your objectives, and a vision to where you're going, and then there are tactics that support getting there. So the added layer to that, though, that I do is, well, what do I need? Like, what do I need to learn? What kind of fuel, coming back to the very first question, who do I need to study? What topics do I need to understand more to be able to help along that journey? And then, what are my non-negotiable recovery practices and mental fitness practices that will allow my mind to be as healthy as possible? Because at the end of the day, speaking as bluntly as I can, when our mind stops working, so does the brand, so does the team, so does the business. It can't continue to flourish if our minds are no longer functioning. Just like if we break our legs and we're a marathon runner, the race is over. And then you can come back, but it's over in that moment. So how do we prevent that kind of stuff, right? So for me, it's always just making sure that my mornings start with some movement, some sort of mental fitness, and it's not always the same thing. Sometimes it's some meditation, sometimes it's journaling, often it's breath work as well. So just practices to just let the mind sit and clear out, so you can start the day feeling clear and motivated and ready to go. And then journaling for me now has turned into, this is the greatest gift that I think the practice has given me, is that I, I I'll journal whenever it's needed. It's not like I have a set time. I mean, of course, I'll do it in the morning and sometimes in the evening to close off the day. But if something comes up in the middle of the day that throws my mind off, right there and then I'll take 30 seconds to just release those feelings, or ask some questions around, like, how would my invisible counsel handle something like this? How would Marcus Aurelius, for example, handle a situation like this? Or what would Maya Angelou do, or Picasso? And this takes minutes, right? But completely shifts the perspective of a situation. So instead of sitting in that mental torture the whole day, and sometimes days and weeks, which then eventually leads to some sort of mental health problem, you can just you can release it. So these are like those are the staples, so that every day there's something just to keep the mind ready for really anything, because that's all I can control. I can't control the next kind of global crisis, or messages, or deals not going through and so forth, but I can control how ready my mind is to process those situations and respond instead of react.
I love what you said, invisible counsel. This is like having a board member for your company, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like these are the typically who are the people you aspire to, that you really want to be your advisors, and you kind of really make them that. I haven't heard that before. That's just what a great way to approach a situation, to think about this.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's been so valuable because I'll have different some of these people are still alive as well, but I may not know them personally, right? Or they're not someone that I can just call up and ask a question to. But if I think of some of the big podcasting hosts, that's one group, to help grow in that art for me. But I can study them, and then all of a sudden, if I'm studying different hosts that are really well known, that I really respect and like how they do operate their business and their show, well, I can learn more and more. Then they're always in my mind. And then the same thing with, I have a mentor right now around just what I call big business, business with leaders that are probably very similar to a lot of the people you work with, that are in revenues of $1 million or $1 billion. Well, how are they thinking? Like, what's what's their level? How do they make decisions at that level? Like, what does that look like? And just to understand more and more, and just slowly shift my own mind to think like that, right? And I don't need to know that billionaire personally. I can study them.
Yeah, just makes me think. What are the historical figures that you mentioned? Some that you aspire to, maybe as your own counsel, or just stories that you really enjoy, you look up to.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, they kind of like how I discussed the power of questions is they change based on where I'm at. I mean, the one Kobe Bryant is one of the profiles in the book, and his just philosophy of Mamba mentality and mindset, and I guess you could say work ethic, is someone that I often go back to. But then someone, in the book as well, that most people, and he's alive today, and he works with a bunch of startup founders and so forth, and is started one of the original venture capital funds in the US when the internet kind of bubble started, Flatiron Ventures. His name is Jerry Colonna, and he he's the one I go to the most. I mean, I can message him, but I actually just reread the profile in the book, because everything that Jerry talks about is all around how can I meet life where I'm at, and it's just, whether it's good, whether it's bad, not from a place of judgment, but how do I just sit in this and be okay in the current situation? So he's always on my mind, in the sense that, like, this too shall pass. It's just always a reminder that, like, nothing is permanent. Everything has an impermanence to it. Some things are longer, some things are shorter, but just knowing that lightens things in your mind, or at least my mind. So he's one. Kobe, like I said. Then Coco Chanel is one that I often think about, because, not someone I really knew, other than the brand, Chanel and whatnot. I kind of just high level knew a little bit about her, but she just commands a presence, from what I learned studying her. And ironically, and I write about this in the chapter, when Coco Chanel would walk into a room, I mean, you could smell it. I mean, given her brand, but that aside, there was an energy. Like, she commanded presence, and there was a confidence to how she stepped into a room that often makes me think, well, what kind of what kind of energy am I giving off when I meet people? And is that the energy I want to give off? And how can I leave that room with that room still thinking about, like, yeah, I feel, in my case, like, I want people to feel good. I want them to feel calm but motivated and inspired. And just setting that intention is often, the whole battle in doing that. So I'll often, for I'm about to head out to Montreal next week to work with a team, and I did some journaling, in preparation for that, from the perspective of, well, how would Coco Chanel show up for this, this gig with this team, and putting my mind in that perspective.
I think this is very relevant in a way to some of the situations we're facing in today's world. And I think you mentioned some very recent ones. I mean, I really respect Kobe Bryant a lot, I think. And just listening to the stories, this is so useful to think of situations and problems that we may encounter, and who are the people that have been very effective that have solved those situations. And for me, I look at, like you, I look at actions, not words,
Yeah.
because of course words do matter, but what's more powerful is the action. And I do look at many different figures, and I've said this before multiple times, but I wonder why people are not aspired to, if we talk about even ancient figures like Genghis Khan or the Alexander the Great, because
Hmm.
there's not big followers of them, because they were just
Yeah.
big conquerors. And I think
Yeah.
people appreciate not the conquering, they they appreciate the love and care. And I always wonder why people follow Jesus. Just thinking of that, and I was reflecting of that power. Of one thing is to give your life for people you love. The other thing is to give your life for people who hate you, who
Hmm.
crucify you. And I felt that, and because this last wish was forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. I felt like he's the greatest carer of the world,
Yeah.
giving his own life for our own good. And that really inspires me, and along many other, but especially when you talk about these like examples of really, and I feel this is such a great way to approach a situation, to think of a historical and also living
Hmm.
role models that really can help. And that's a great advice, not only for younger generation, but for anyone
Of course.
that they can ask and reflect these questions, which has been super helpful to hear. But if we talk about, let's say, the two ends of the spectrum, the current leaders of today, exactly those leaders who excel, and there are many leaders that are doing well, okay, but they're not at the very very top. They're not the yet at the excelling part, which is the question you ask: how could I stand out, from the
Yeah.
second theme? What do you think would be a great question for them to ask themselves? They're running, like, imagine they're in a, let's say, larger businesses, larger corporates, and they have different dynamics. Everybody, the reason I say leaders, because everybody wants more from them, especially if they're CEO of company. The shareholders, if it's a larger company, want more. The employees want more. The customers want, everybody wants more, and it's very difficult often for them.
Yeah.
What do you think? Would be a really great questions for them to ask themselves in order to really stand out from that place where from good to great.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more, or I can expand on kind of what we've already been talking about, because I think those practices or those questions will naturally get you to that place, but you can just be more intentional with it. So, if you can identify someone or a group of people that are at the location or at the place that you want to be from a business perspective, but then I'd also say from a human and characteristic perspective, who are those people, right? Again, alive or dead. And then again, all of these things, ask these questions from a place of non-judgment. Now you ask yourself, well, where am I at? And just facts. Maybe I'm here and I want to be here. well, what do I need to do? Like, what's in the gap there? What's the difference? Truly, what is the difference between what I do day in, day out and the characteristics that I feel I have myself versus where I want to be and what I know some of those other people are doing day in, day out? We have the answer. It's all there. What typically happens is we get stuck in just the daily, like, minutia of running the business and the actions and so forth, where it's hard to zoom out to work on the business or work on ourselves, right? Because we could that process. I mean, of course, I would answer that or I'd ask that question first thing in the morning before you take in any outside information or connect with the outside world. So your mind is at its freshest. You'll come up with the answers within. I'm willing to put money on it that you'll have those answers within 10 to 15 minutes. But to your point, we've got to do something now and take action with that insight. Because again, just like a business, it's just data, right? So now we know. It's like, okay, well, what are some of the steps I can take? And some of those steps from understanding, like, if it's, I don't know, if you've got Elon Musk as that person, and I've studied him, and here's the thing with interesting people, or people like Elon Musk that are, let's just say, controversial in many ways, because some people really like something, others don't like this. You can take the good and leave the bad. You don't have to take all of Elon Musk, because there's a lot of really innovative thinking, and you can't dismiss what he's done for many industries, for example. So you can take that, right? And then you can also study. There's many, he's been on many podcasts, there's many books that have been written. Now you start to study, and you start to see the themes around, well, how does he think? And now you have your action items, right? And I know this because I did study him, and I wrote a bonus chapter on Elon Musk. And for me, what was coming up was just real simple first principles thinking and ideation and decisions, and asking question after question to get to the core of a problem. Right to the point where, as an example to illustrate the point, when he was working on SpaceX and was trying to figure out, well, how do we commercialize space travel, or even sending satellites up into space, and not be a government run kind of institution, and still be able to afford to make these rockets. He started asking questions. Well, how much does it cost? Okay. Or he started getting quotes for how much it would cost to build a rocket. Well, then what's entailed? Like, what are the components of the rocket? Which, that's an interesting question. Some people may ask that, but he went right to the next level. What raw materials are required in those parts? And can we source that? And because of that additional question, they were able to make their rockets. I can't remember the stat, but I think at 2% of the cost that they were being quoted. So, you start studying this kind of stuff, and you're like, well, where can I use that principle in my business right now? Maybe there's something I'm missing there, right? And then all of a sudden, you're within your realm of expertise, able to get to the core of something, as just one example. But it starts with just getting very clear on where we're at, where we want to be, what the gap is, and who can help us get there. Who do we need to study? What questions we need to ask?
No, I really love that way of really structuring and thinking, and that's so helpful also for the up and coming, the younger generation, because they want to be successful. I think the biggest issue that I see with younger or the Gen Z, the younger generation, is their decision fatigue. They have a lot of access to a lot of things. What would
Mhm.
be your advice to them if you don't know what you really want to do? What advice would you give yourself? If you're 20 years old and thinking of the future.
Well, I think at that, I mean, I wish I had this kind of advice at that age, because I would have experimented more. I just I and I empathize with a lot of the younger generation, because when I was at that age, I think I felt the same thing. I was going to school, and I'm like, I want to go down this business arm, and if so, I'm going to go study and do this and so forth. Which I did, and it's been helpful, but I could have never imagined that I'd be doing what I'm doing right now with you, or even having a podcast that it didn't even exist at that point, right? So my advice is, and others have said this as well, but it's just to go out and experiment. At an age like that, you have to. You, it's hard to know what path not to take if you don't test the path, right? And just see what you like, see what lights you up, and what gives you a lot of energy versus depletes you of energy. And I still do that to this day. We're recording this on a Friday. Part of my weekly review is to look at my entire calendar for the week and look at every meeting, look at every task that was set, and just gauge all of it. What gave me energy? What left me really depleted? It's not to say that everything is going to be energizing, but if the balance is really off, that's not sustainable and is a sign that I'm not doing the right things.
Oh, I really love that. That expression was, it's difficult to know what path you're gonna take if you don't take the if you don't test the path. That's just a nice quote, to remember. I was so brilliant in this. Finally, it's been really incredibly useful, and thank you for sharing those insights, Mark. It's
Well, thank
absolute
you.
value and honor to be here. What is your hopes for more caring, more hopeful future?
Hmm. I mean, my hope is that the vast majority of the population is able to get to a place where they wake up feeling good and happy more days than not. And I do firmly believe that there is a path to that place, and frankly that we all deserve that. And one of the paths is to spend some time on yourself and in reflection and asking, some of the questions that we've been talking about in this conversation, so that, day by day we just get clearer and clearer on who we are and who we're striving to become. And as we go down that journey and continue to progress, I mean, that sense of progress is typically what gives us those emotions of happiness and feeling good, because we as humans get real lit up when we're making progress, and it could be the smallest of progress. It doesn't have to be that you started a company and sold it. That's a different scale. But just that I made progress today on something that matters. And the more of us that do that, then all of a sudden we unlock so much other potential in other people, because then those people are the ones that end up running companies of teams and so forth that are working on beautiful, impact technologies or solutions and so forth, because it's coming from a place that feels right, and that's available to all of us. And I think as we've been talking, and as people are listening, it's not super complicated. It doesn't have to be this big shakeup. I mean, it just takes some intentional reflection and some intentional practices that work for you to just check in, quiet the mind, and then equally also have those same practices that motivate and prime and get us excited. And we just have to keep doing that over and over again. That's it.
Mark, I thank you sincerely for being with us today. May I wish you an exceptional year of fruitfulness, and
Mm.
may God bless you, you and your family and your team, and expand your cause during the year and be a blessing to many others. Thank you so much for being with us and being a leader who cares. It's been an absolute honor to have you.
Oh, right back at you. And thank you for such beautiful questions and your presence. I really felt that. Thank you.
Thank you.